The Grandview Bistro's main dining room buzzed with the elegant energy of fine dining at its peak. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over pristine white tablecloths, while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying plates that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Tonight, the restaurant's most exclusive private dining room had been reserved for Mom's 58th birthday celebration. 15 family members gathered around a table that probably cost more to reserve than some people's monthly rent. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, deliberately positioned where I could observe the family dynamics without drawing too much attention to myself. My simple black dress from a chain store stood out starkly against the sea of designer clothing surrounding me. To my family, I was still the daughter who'd lost her way 4 years ago, abandoning what they called a perfectly good marketing career, to pursue what they dismissed as playing around with websites. What they didn't know was that those 4 years of family disappointment had resulted in me building Harrison Digital Empire, a portfolio of online businesses, real estate investments and tech startups now worth $2.1 billion. More specifically, what they didn't know was that 6 months ago, I'd quietly purchased the Grandview Bistro, along with 12 other upscale restaurants in the city, as part of my hospitality investment strategy. Emma, sweetheart. My Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the dinner conversation, her tone dripping with the kind of sympathy reserved for lost causes. Are you still doing that little computer hobby? When are you planning to get back to real work? Polite laughter rippled around the table. My brother David, who'd just been promoted to senior partner at his accounting firm, raised his wine glass with a condescending smile. She's probably still living in that tiny studio apartment, staying up all night working on whatever it is she thinks she's building. I keep telling people my sister is between careers because honestly, I can't explain what she actually does. More laughter. My sister Jennifer, fresh from closing another $1 million real estate deal, examined her perfectly manicured nails. I've offered to help her find a proper sales position at my agency. With the right training and supervision, she could probably earn a decent living. But she insists on this whole entrepreneur fantasy. I smiled politely and took a bite of my truffle risotto, a dish that cost $85 and, ironically, one I'd helped develop when I'd worked with the head chef to revamp the restaurant's menu after my acquisition. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family was mocking my business acumen while sitting in a restaurant I owned, eating food from a menu I'd influenced, discussing my failures at a table I was ultimately paying for. Uncle Robert, Dad's older brother and a prominent insurance broker, leaned forward with that patronizing expression I'd grown accustomed to over the past 4 years. Emma, your father and I were discussing your situation last week. I could get you a position at my agency. Entry-level, of course. Answering phones, basic data entry. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work with benefits and a steady paycheck. That's incredibly generous of you, Uncle Robert, my cousin Lisa added, her voice filled with false compassion. Emma really needs someone to give her a reality check about the working world. It's not her fault she's been allowed to live in this fantasy for so long. Dad nodded approvingly from his position at the head of the table. Robert's absolutely right. 4 years is long enough to indulge this internet nonsense. It's time for Emma to accept that not everyone is cut out for business ownership. There's no shame in being an employee. Most people are. The conversation continued around me, each family member taking turns offering their perspective on my situation. What made it particularly amusing was that my phone had been buzzing all evening with notifications about the 3 new acquisition deals my team had closed that afternoon. Purchases totaling $340 million that would expand my restaurant portfolio into 2 new cities. Mom stood up, tapping her champagne flute with her wedding ring to call for attention. At 58, Catherine Harrison was still striking, though her beauty had become as polished and artificial as her personality. She wore a new Chanel dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, paired with diamonds that caught the candlelight with every gesture. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she began, her voice carrying that particular authority she'd perfected over decades of running charity committees and social organizations. 58 years old. Where has the time gone? She looked around the table with satisfaction, her gaze lingering on each family member with obvious pride. Looking at this table, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for what our family has accomplished. David, my wonderful son, just made senior partner at Morrison & Associates, the youngest in the firm's history. Enthusiastic applause as David beamed with pride. Jennifer, my brilliant daughter, just closed the largest residential real estate deal in the city this quarter. $4.2 million for that beautiful estate on Maple Hill. More applause as Jennifer smiled graciously and raised her glass. We've built something special in this family, Mom continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. A legacy of hard work, realistic goals, and practical success. We understand the value of traditional careers, stable income, and building wealth through proven methods. Her eyes found mine, and I saw the familiar pause, that moment where she had to decide how to handle the family disappointment in front of an audience. Of course, she continued, her tone shifting to something that sounded almost sad, not everyone in a family follows the same path. Sometimes you have children who struggle to find their place in the real world. The table went quiet, all eyes turning toward me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Emma has been exploring for 4 years now. Living in that small apartment, working on projects that don't seem to generate any actual income, refusing offers of help from family members who could give her real opportunities. She paused for effect, letting her words sink in while scanning the faces around the table for supportive nods. She found them in abundance. We've been patient, perhaps too patient, hoping she'd eventually realize that success requires more than just wishful thinking and internet research. But at some point, love means telling someone the hard truth. Uncle Robert cleared his throat supportively. Sometimes people need to hear reality even when it's difficult. Exactly, Mom said, her voice growing stronger. Which is why I think tonight is the perfect time to address this situation directly. She turned to face me fully, her expression a mixture of disappointment and what she probably thought was tough love. Emma, you're 31 years old. You're living like a college student, pursuing fantasies that haven't produced any measurable results and, frankly, embarrassing yourself and this family with your refusal to accept reality. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. 15 pairs of eyes focused on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to this public intervention. Stop pretending you matter, she said finally, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. You're just embarrassing yourself. The words hung in the air, more cruel than anything she'd said before. Around the table, I saw nods of agreement, murmurs of support for Mom's tough love approach, and a few barely concealed smiles of satisfaction. I looked at her for a long moment, studying the face that had once read me bedtime stories and bandaged my scraped knees. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder I'd brought with me. Actually, Mom, I said calmly, opening the folder and removing a set of documents, I own this restaurant. The table went completely silent. I placed the property deed on the table where everyone could see it. Grandview Bistro, purchased 6 months ago for $3.2 million through Harrison Digital Holdings. Before anyone could respond, Marcus Rodriguez, the restaurant's general manager, appeared at our table. I'd texted him discreetly when I'd arrived, asking him to stop by around this time in the evening. Good evening, Ms. Harrison, he said, giving me a respectful bow that made the entire table freeze in shock. I hope you're enjoying your dinner tonight. Shall I prepare your usual private table for next time, or would you prefer the main dining room? The silence that followed was deafening. The main dining room will be fine for future visits, Marcus. Thank you. Of course, Ms. Harrison. Is there anything specific you'd like me to adjust about tonight's service? Everything has been perfect as always. Please give my compliments to Chef Williams on the truffle risotto. The recipe modifications we discussed last month have really elevated the dish. I'll be sure to pass along your feedback. Have a wonderful evening. As Marcus walked away, I turned back to my family who were staring at me like I'd just performed a magic trick they couldn't understand. I also own Bella Vista Downtown, the Garden Terrace on 5th Street, and about 10 other restaurants in the city, I continued conversationally. They're part of my hospitality investment portfolio, which is one division of Harrison Digital Empire. Dad found his voice first. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward him. Actually, I have approximately $2.1 billion in total assets across various investments, with about $400 million in liquid funds. The numbers on the screen made several people gasp audibly. Jennifer leaned forward, her face pale. Emma, how did you? I built Harrison Digital Empire over the past 4 years. We own and operate a portfolio of online businesses, real estate investments and tech startups. Our current annual revenue is approximately $890 million. Uncle Robert's mouth was hanging open. But the apartment, the clothes, the way you've been living. I live simply because I work 16-hour days building and managing my companies. I dress modestly because I spend my time in boardrooms with Fortune 500 CEOs, not at social events. And I've never felt the need to prove my success to people who'd already decided I was a failure. David finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? I looked around the table at the 15 family members who'd spent the evening mocking my life choices and questioning my intelligence. Would it have mattered? I asked. Would any of you have treated me differently if you'd known I had money? Or would you have just found new ways to minimize my achievements? The question hung in the air and nobody seemed able to answer it. For 4 years, you've all assumed I was failing because I wasn't following your prescribed path to success. You've offered me entry-level jobs, suggested I give up my fantasies, and tonight Mom told me to stop pretending I matter. I gathered the property documents and put them back in my folder. The truth is, I've been building something none of you could imagine while you were all busy feeling sorry for me. I own the restaurant you're sitting in. I employ over 1,200 people across my various companies. I have business partnerships with companies you'd recognize from the Fortune 500 list. Mom's face had gone completely white. Emma, I had no idea. We all thought. You thought what you wanted to think, I said, standing up from the table. You saw someone who didn't fit your definition of success and decided she must be failing. I pulled out my wallet and placed $500 on the table, more than enough to cover the entire dinner bill. Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you enjoyed your meal. Marcus will take excellent care of you for the rest of the evening. He's one of the best managers in my restaurant group. As I walked toward the exit, I heard the explosion of whispered conversations behind me. Phones were probably already coming out as family members frantically Googled my name and company. The valet brought my car around, not the beat-up Honda they thought I drove, but a sleek BMW that I'd purchased the previous month. As I drove home to my penthouse apartment, not the tiny studio they imagined, I reflected on the evening's events. Tomorrow they'd probably all be calling with apologies and requests to rebuild our relationship. They'd want to understand how they'd been so wrong about everything, and they'd probably expect immediate forgiveness for 4 years of condescension and dismissal. But tonight I was going to enjoy the silence of my luxury apartment, the view of the city skyline that included 12 restaurants I owned, and the profound satisfaction of finally showing my family exactly who they'd been dismissing all along. Sometimes the best response to being told you don't matter isn't an argument. It's evidence that you matter more than they could ever imagine.